Okay, Chair, we're streaming live now. You can start the meeting.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the first Zoom meeting of this board. Start with item 1, apologies for absence.
None received, Chairman.
Sorry, did someone say something?
Yes.
None received, Chairman.
Jenny said we haven't had any apologies, Chairman.
I've received apologies for, I have a note here from Jenny, which tells me there's apologies from Councillor McCutcheon.
Yeah, he's present,
actually
Chairman.
come in.
Right, okay. Item 2, declarations of interest by members. They only need to declare interests that aren't already recorded in the register of interests. Are there any declarations? No? Okay. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January. There are 2 sets of meetings here, private and public. If we want to discuss anything on the private minutes, then we'll have to go into private session. And if that's the case, I suggest we leave that particular section until later on and we deal with all of that together. But first of all, can we seek approval for the public minutes?
Great.
Okay, they're approved. And can we seek approval of the private minutes?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item 4, action log, report from Joanne Walton.
Hello. Yeah, no, nothing further to add.
Sorry, if
Sorry,
you're
John,
not.
we didn't hear you.
Sorry, can I suggest if you're not speaking, can you please mute your microphone? Can I please suggest?
Right. I said nothing further to add to the action log. So just any questions if anyone has any.
Anybody have any questions? Any of the board members? Okay, thank you, Joe. Move on, item 5, internal audit report. I'd got down here, it was going to be introduced by Stephen Mangan. I'm guessing that's changed.
No, that's me, Chair.
No, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Just to provide context, this item was considered at the June Pension Committee. The report summarises the findings from the internal audit review of arrangements covering the administration of pensions for the financial year ending March 2020. In terms of level of assurance which we give on each of our reviews, for the adequacy of the system, we are pleased to report that we've provided the highest level of assurance available, which is substantial. This reflects our view that effective and embedded systems are in place to support the administration of pensions. Furthermore, our review has identified no weaknesses in the design of the systems currently in place. In terms of compliance, good assurance was provided in that overall the review found high levels of compliance with agreed processes. 3 recommendations were made, which are included in the action plan within the report. In advance of attending the Pensions Committee, I received an update on progress by the relevant officers who have advised me that all of these actions have now been implemented. We will formally assess progress when we undertake the 2021 review, which is likely to start in November, December time, but we haven't quite agreed that date yet. The only other point I wanted to mention was in respect of reconciliations referred to in the report, such as employee contributions and pension payroll and alter. Our review considers whether there is a process in place to complete the reviews and that this is being progressed. Given the scale of some of the reviews and other work priorities, we're not really in a position to judge how quickly such activities should be completed, other than noting the status of such work. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions? No questions. Thank you, Stephen. Item 6, Pensions Administration Report. Appendix 4 to this report is private, so he's in the pink papers. Again, if we want to actually discuss the items on the appendix, we'll need to go into private session. Otherwise, I'd ask Joanne to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the regular report we bring to you to update you on administrative performance of the pension fund. We haven't met since January, so this covers the period from then to date. So as usual, we have the variances against the forecast investments and administration expenses in Appendix 1, key performance indicators in Appendix 2, receipt of employee and employer contributions in Appendix 3, and any late payers in Appendix 4. In Section 5 of this report, we detail the breaches of the law that have occurred in the administration of the funds since January. I need to point out here that as you'll remember from the breaches of the law policy that we have in place, there are two categories of breaches: material and non-material. Material breaches are of such significance that we would need to report them to the pensions regulator. We don't feel that any of the breaches here that have occurred are worthy of report to the pensions regulator. Section 6 details the internal dispute resolution procedure cases that we've got ongoing at the moment. They're detailed in the table on 6.2. We have the usual data improvement activities in Section 7, resolution of unprocessed leaver records, an update on the numbers in that and how that's progressing. Section 7.2, the contracted out liabilities rectification project that's been ongoing for some time. I'm pleased to say that we've received the final file of data that we've been waiting for from HMRC for a very long time. So work will begin on that in the autumn. We have the update on any new employers into the scheme and any that have left. So happy to take any questions anybody has on any of those items, bearing in mind the private appendix if you want to talk about any of the late paying employers.
Anybody have any questions? No. Okay.
Paul, you're on mute.
Sorry, item 7, governance and compliance. Again, appendix 1 is private. So if you want to discuss that, we'll need to go into private session. And again, could I invite Joe Walton to introduce it, please?
Thank you. So this is the report that I bring to you every meeting to discuss any activities that are going on in the world with regards to governance and compliance of the pension fund. As you'll see from this report, it's quite a long and detailed report. I'm happy to go through anything in detail if anyone's got any questions. Some of the most important things here are probably worthy of mention. In particular, section 2.1, the guidance on responsible investment decisions. I should probably take this opportunity to remind you of the 15th of July Responsible Investment Day that you have been invited to. That'd be really worthy of attendance. It's on Zoom. Here you can contribute your thoughts and feelings with regards to responsible investment through a survey that we're going to be undertaking. Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything more on that, do you, for the day?
On the, I will touch on it on the business plan actually, because it's one of the activities in there. So yeah.
Other than that, another important aspect here is 6.2, the McLeod update. We are soon to receive a consultation from government as to how the regulations need amending for the LGPS to cope with the remedy that's being put in place. We will bring that consultation to the board. It's a 3-month consultation, so you should be able to see it either in draft or as a final response to the next meeting. Just to reference here that it's likely to involve a lot of administration work for the fund, some of which may or may not be automated by our software solutions. But it'll be a very time-consuming, long project to action the remedy, and probably for very little gain for the members also. So it's quite a hefty project for little return. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Any questions? Martin?
So just going to back to that point about a lot of work for not a lot of gain, is that going to push something else out of the way? Perhaps we'll come on to this in the business plan, but is that going to push something else out of the way? And if so, what?
Well, we've just started the very early planning stages of this. We don't know any of the detail with regards to the remedy. I mean, nor do we know what the software supplier solutions are likely to be. They are just as involved as we are, particularly with the consultation and the changes to the regs. So whilst we hope not, it all really is dependent on the level of automation that can be deployed by the software companies here. Mark, I don't know if you've got any further views. I mean, it does come again in the business plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess the thing for me will be what flexibility we have regarding timelines, because if, for example, the remedy has to be completed over a very, let's say a 1 year period, then that means a concentration of resource. I mean, generally people are speaking of things that are in the business plan are things that have to be done. And sometimes we have some flexibility, sometimes we don't. This will be another thing competing, as you rightly identify. I suspect if the timeline is quite tight, we will have to find a way of resourcing it, either getting extra people in for a short period or outsourcing in some way. Obviously, bringing people in tends to be the cheaper option.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kev.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I've been reading the Supreme Court decision on the investment guidance. It's quite interesting the way it's bounced backwards and forwards, isn't it, between different decisions. But does this mean that this decision is now final, as they've denied the right to appeal? So
yes, although I guess the key part of the decision was really around whether government had the ability to grant, be able to put in place advice. So obviously they could put what they desire in a way that is legally compliant. I think this has got legs still, to be fair. So I doubt this will be the final position. But clearly the avenue they took to put in place that guidance wasn't, it's been deemed inappropriate, really.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it, actually, is if they put it in a different format or a different context, they might be able to get through what they want to achieve here. But it's the part of it that I was reading into it where they're talking about they deem that pensions money to be their money, if you like, which I don't think I agree with. You know what I mean? But it's you can see where they're coming from, because it's partly funded, isn't it, by public money? So
it is very nuanced in that. I mean, if you examine it, obviously members pay in, and scheme employers pay in, and scheme employers pay the balance of cost, obviously. And the only other avenue we have to get funds is obviously the investment growth, but that comes from those two sources in the first place. So I think it as with all these things, there's a headline comment, and then if you explore the detail, there's more to it than that headline, as is the case here.
Yeah, but that day on the 15th of July, that event will sort of explain this a little bit more, won't it? Go into it.
Yes, so I'll touch on that now, right? If with the chairman's permission, if that's okay, Chairman.
Yeah, I think. Can I just point out first of all that I think as a board, maybe we just need to remember that we're really the sort of eyes and the ears of the Scheme Advisory Board, and we're part of that sort of hierarchical line, if you like, rather than the Pensions Committee line. And really, it's our duty to support their view, whatever that view may be. But by all means, do you want to move on to the business plan, Mark? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the role of the local pension board is to support the administration of the fund. Obviously the MHCLG is separate from the Scheme Advisory Board. Obviously the Scheme Advisory Board was put in by the Public Sector Pensions Act with a particular responsibility. So I think you know, I think that's probably important to distinguish, but it's up to you. I mean, if you want me to move on to the business plan, I can go through that, all the activities, including the RI.
No, I'm sorry, Mark. I thought you wanted to move on to the business plan. I thought you were saying it was best discussed further there.
Well, what I do is because now the RI training day has been raised a couple of times. If I could just address that, then we can move the next agenda item. We can go through the business plan in full. Yeah.
Well, perhaps first, does anybody else have any other questions on this particular report? No, okay. I think we can move on to that report anyway, Mark, and then.
Okay.
Thank you, John, for that. And perhaps Mark could introduce the item 8, the pension fund business plan.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. So. We prepared, as you're probably aware, we prepare a draft business plan for approval of the Pensions Committee in March for the next financial year, which we did this year. The March Pensions Committees were obviously cancelled, so it didn't have the opportunity to be presented. So what this is an updated version that was approved by the Northamptonshire Pensions Committee at their last meeting. What we did was we slightly tweaked the financial numbers, but it was mainly a reprofiling of the activities to cope with COVID. I won't mention too much about COVID because Joe's going to go through that in some detail in the next agenda item. But just going through the business plan, I'll first of all just mention the numbers. So if we turn to page 71. Which is the cash flow projection. I guess one thing to add on this page is the biggest thing we get wrong, as you would probably expect, is the expected performance of the fund. You know, in terms of how well the investments are going to do. Obviously, incredibly difficult to predict. But what I would say we haven't done is we haven't assumed any particular shape of recovery. So, the investments went down, they've bounced back tremendously well during this crisis. We haven't really projected any, further full recovery, etc., in those numbers. So I should say we're not predicting anything particularly in those. Okay. Turning over the page into the numbers where we have greater control. Obviously, the management expenses, including the admin expenses down the bottom. So this is page 72. What you'll notice there is broadly staff costs are moving in line with inflationary pay awards. So we're all employed by Northamptonshire County Council, and they did grant a pay increase this year, which they hadn't done for some time. So that is reflected in those numbers. We are at full establishment and pretty much entering into the pandemic. And because nobody has been leaving their roles, understandably, we're not getting the normal turnover we would expect. In fact, we're getting practically zero turnover. So therefore, I would expect probably a slight overspend on the staff line come the end of the financial year. So that's not built in here, but I'll just forewarn you, that's probably something I would expect. The other thing to note is that the overheads have gone down significantly from 2021, which is really pleasing. So we've been, talking for some years about trying to suppress those, and pleasingly they have dropped considerably. So those are the charges for things like, accommodation, business systems, IT infrastructure, all those sorts of things. Any questions on any of the financial numbers before I move on to the activities?
Anybody?
Why have the overheads gone down then, Mark? What's the reason? It's good news, isn't it? But
yeah, it's we've been trying to suppress them. We managed to get them down a few years back. This is a partly around the shake-up of obviously the LGPS model, those sorts of things. So it's interrelated to that and the overhead at the centre of that. So I mean, it's a significant reduction. So I'm pleased that going forward we've got it. Okay. But yeah, I think probably about 3 years ago we had a reduction then as well. So it's just like the second one over about 5 years.
Good.
Martin, were you indicating you wanted to come in?
Yes, please. I appreciate this is going to be really hard to answer, but the investment performance is clearly going to be, well, who can predict where it's going to go, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you had any indicators that any of our investments are going to have to be are looking a bit more weak?
Well, I think the surprising thing is we've had pretty much a total recovery of the investments. So, you know, the American index in particular has done incredibly well and is back where, you know, above where it was. So it almost looks too good to be true is the issue at the moment more than anything. The UK index has been a bit more suppressed. But you know, we'll see the S&P drives a lot of the global economy. So I think if anything, the fear would be that it's going to go down again and then before it goes back up again, and you know what the timing of that is. So you know, if you look at it today, it looks really good, and almost as if we've recovered from the pandemic in economic terms. But of course, it reacts very quickly to news and sentiment, as you know. So yeah, so what we've not looked at is whether there's going to be a further dip, or whether this is just continuing on an upward trajectory. We're just assuming in effect, what we do is we know what the actuary expects as a return, and we build that into our financial planning. Because over the long term, it will be right. It's just over any 3-year period, it will clearly be probably incorrect.
Yeah. Okay, cheers.
The other thing to add, I guess, on that is that the Pensions Committee had an update on the investments at the last meeting. At the next one later in July, the actuary is going to what is our annual general meeting, and which, you know, you're all invited to, obviously, to look at. The actuary is going to be talking about the funding implication. So on the liability side, what the impact of the pandemic is, you know, things like gilt yields, etc.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll move through the activities now. So starting on page 75, and you know, you'll see they're in different sections. So I'll pause at the end of each section in case there's any questions. On the first service delivery one, so what I want to just draw attention to is SD4, which is the extension of the pensions admin and payroll software. So, I mean, we use the Altair platform, as you've perhaps heard us mention. It's a database, it's a document imaging system, it's a payroll system. It does literally, you know, it's everything we do goes through that. And we had the ability to extend it for 3 years from 2021. And if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would have perhaps been in a different position. But a couple of things happened. One, the national framework for this software was a little bit delayed in getting up and running. Secondly, we couldn't really initiate any sort of detailed, you know, procurement because of the pandemic when exactly we would want it to. And for these reasons, really, we were in a position where it's going to push us right into the unitary window, which, as you're aware, also shifted back 1 year. So for a whole host of reasons, what we put in the business plan was to extend that for the 3 years, which was built into the contract, rather than try to do a procurement right now, which would have meant a transition and sort of probably a year's worth of planning work right at the point we're trying to sort out the unitary and local government reorganisation. Because it's such a huge contract, it would take about a year to do the transition if we were to change supplier. And that's because every single business process we have would have to be re-engineered, as well as a new payroll system implemented. So, you know, you would award the contract. If it was a new supplier, we would have a year of transition before we could actually move over to a new supplier. So we asked for a 3-year extension, and the committee approved that. Any questions on that or any of the other ones in the service delivery section?
Just on the extension then, does that use up all your ability to extend so that in 3 years' time we have to re-contract or at least re-tender?
We would want to test the market anyway, properly this time, because the market has changed since the last time we did effectively a tender, a full tender process. There used to really only be one supplier. Now there are multiple suppliers available, so it would be wholly appropriate to test the market at the earliest opportunity.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay, so if we move on to governance and compliance, which starts on page 78. I think. Well, I was going to mention. I think Joe's already touched on GC1 now. Obviously, the GMP rectification in the fact we actually have the file is available now, so we can work with our outsourced provider ITM to do some work on that. So I don't think there's anything further to add. But was there any questions on any of those other ones under the governance and compliance section? No. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so the next section, communication systems and employer management. The one I would like to just touch on here is number 2, which is the scope requirements for data collection in respect of the transitional protections. So this is the cloud, which Joe again just touched on a few moments ago. This is an activity that will morph as we plan what is required. This activity will will move into a full plan of what needs to be done from a cloud, timelines when we're able to put them in, resources and financial costs. So it's fair to say that this is going to change as an activity into a more effectively a project plan, or even a program of work connected with the cloud. Okay. And moving on to operations, page 83. Now, Ops 1 is the unprocessed levers. You saw them in last year's business plan. They still exist. You'd have seen that we got rid of about half the backlog. So what we have agreed is that we would continue using Aon. Well, they have a number of contracts with us, but we're using a benefits consultancy contract to do some further work on about 1,000 cases, in tandem with a lot of work in-house as well. But the key thing we've been doing is transition every employer over to providing data monthly, and removing the need for them to issue a leaving certificate to tell us someone's left. So what it means is the monthly file will automatically tell us someone's left and give us the information to process a benefit without us having to wait for a form to come in, which has caused a lot of this build-up of backlog. So yeah, a couple of things. One, complete change in process. And we've certainly got all of our major suppliers, providers of information over to that now. But secondly, just, trying to reprofile this activity going forward as well. The other activity in this one, you would have seen a mention of this last year, but we're really scoping this out now. What this Ops 2 on page 85, if you can imagine, someone leaves a scheme, and if they've got short service, they're entitled to a refund. So we write to them and say, this is what you're entitled to. You can either claim it or you can transfer elsewhere. If they don't respond, that refund just sits there until, you know, they come back in the, you know, come back into the scheme in a different job, maybe years later, they go into another pension fund.
Got cut off, sorry. Coming now. Arthur, it's up there.
Councillor McCutcheon just rejoining the meeting. So
Okay. Okay. Yes. So to cut a long story short, people don't always claim their refunds, and if they don't, they sit in the pension fund for years and years and years. And what we are trying to do here is to effectively make contact and get as many people as possible to claim refunds if they're entitled to it. Never been seen as a huge priority, as you can imagine, but what it gets rid of is it gets rid of lots of time and tiny liabilities. Okay.
Mark?
Yeah.
What happens to the money if people don't claim it? Does it just sit in the fund? Just stays in the pot then?
It does. I mean, there was an attempt to change they did change the MHCLG did change the legislation to say if someone doesn't claim it for 5 years, then they can't have a refund. But we believe that legislation is going to be reversed out. I think it was put in to try to give us almost like a stick to force people to claim a refund. But it hasn't practically worked because people still don't. And if they don't, you know, you have to find a way of technically dealing with that, by using like an escrow account or something like that. So it cost a headache more than you know, a solution, as it were. Right. But yeah, so yeah, it can just sit there, because we can't force someone to take action, obviously.
No, I was just wondering though, because some other unclaimed funds of various things go to, I don't know, they go to Inland Revenue or they go to certain pots, don't they? Do you know what I mean? But ours just stays there, does it, within the remit of this?
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you.
So was there another, Julie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wondered what kind of numbers you were talking about here. It just says a large number. I can't see exactly any.
Oh gosh, it's you're talking, I think it's over 5k. Yeah, you're talking thousands. You're talking thousands for thousands. Yeah, yeah. If you can imagine, this is some of these would have built up over decades, and you do get a gradual reduction in a sense because you know, people do rejoin local government, and what we have now is a very good online system whereby if someone rejoins another fund anywhere in the country, we can see, and then if we've got something sitting there, we can make contact. So that's a great improvement. So more in a sense are probably going now than they were in the past, but it's been going on for many years, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And just finally then moving on to the next section, which is investments. I mean, some of this may be completely fresh to you. So we are making I'll just go through these one by one very quickly. We're making a strategic reallocation to fixed income. So obviously equities and fixed income are our two main buckets of investments. I guess now alongside alternatives, I suppose. But traditionally it's been equities and fixed income. And what we've done is just made an allocation to multi-asset credit, which is I guess it's in a way slightly more complex way of dealing with fixed income, but it does deliver a greater return. It has a much more different, you know, options available in the fixed income space. Asset pooling is obviously continuing. The independent investment advisor number 4 at the top of page 88, we've gone to market to see, you know, who's interested to become an independent advisor. We obviously have one already in the Northamptonshire Fund, Mark Stevens, but the contract was due to expire, so we've gone to market, and we're just going through that appointment process, that recruitment process at the moment. But the one I really wanted to touch on was the responsible investment policy. So you've been invited to a training day on the 15th of July. Going to be held obviously via Zoom. It was going to be, you know, it was one of the scheduled ones at Boston Lakes. And this has been quite a process. So what we're going to do is to deliver some training, some theoretical, but also some practical in terms of, you know, you can see how engagement works. You'll be able to hear from a ESG factor manager, whereby they screen out a number of different types of investments like fossil fuels, and to see how that works. We'll be looking at an impact investing manager, so theory and practical. We will then be surveying your beliefs in the responsible investment space, and from the beliefs of the local pension board members and the pension committee members, we will then put together a new responsible investment policy, which will ultimately go for approval, and then go into the investment strategy, and then that will go to public consultation. So this is sort of a long process that will go through the remainder of this financial year, starting with some training, and then a belief survey with yourselves. But I would say finally that obviously we've had a couple of ESG training days over the last year or year and a bit, so it's building on those as well. And that will of course address the whole gamut of environmental, social and governance factors that you fit within responsible investment, including, you know, what was touched on earlier, that Supreme Court judgment. Yes, of course, climate related factors, but you know, the governance is incredibly important. The social, the societal aspects are obviously also important. It's not just to focus on climate. Any questions around any of that? That was my last comment on the business plan.
Any further questions?
Could I ask a question for you?
Certainly, Councillor McCutcheon.
The training day, you gave the date of the 15th.
Oh, did I? Right, am I wrong?
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
15th of July, was that?
Yes, it's July. It's been in diaries, members' diaries for. It's on the Wednesday the 15th.
Thank you. It's something that I haven't got in my diary at the moment. It might be my fault. Wednesday 15th, and it's at what time?
It's I think it's 10 o'clock start.
Okay. 30 miles.
Let me just check if it's been. Yeah, I've got it in as a Zoom from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the diary.
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so the morning session will be led by Mercer, our investment consultant, and Paul will be getting involved as well, our investment manager. I think the afternoon is more a number of short presentations by parties who are doing things in the space like I just described, so impact, engagement, factor investing, those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Move on, item 9, governance, administration, risk management in the light of coronavirus pandemic. Jan Walton, please.
Thank you. So this is a report that we've written and presented also to the Pensions Committee to demonstrate that we've been managing the virus in terms of service delivery and what actions we put in place. So if I run through it, firstly, staffing. Most officers, apart from one, are working from home. We have one person in the office that's dealing with incoming post and scanning of that post, and any printing that needs doing. We're trying to reduce the amount of printing we're doing through use of member self-service, but there is still an element of printing that needs to be done. Staff have the equipment they need to work from home. The County Council has run a scheme where items such as larger monitors, desktop computers and chairs have been lent to make sure people are comfortable working from home. In terms of staff absence, there's been very little absence at all. At the beginning, there was a little bit where prior to testing, people who had symptoms were self-isolating, but we haven't had any reports of anybody needing to self-isolate for a good couple of months now, so that's good news. So, yep, regards to our operational priorities, the pensions regulator issued some guidance on what should be our priorities. They are paying member benefits, retirement processing, and dealing with any death benefits that need paying. These were already our operational priorities in such a situation, so that they were reflected in our business continuity plan already. There's been some, the LGA have issued some frequently asked questions for both scheme employers and scheme members. They're all available on our website. So that really sums it up. I believe everything is going well. We're now, how many months down the line? 3 months down the line. We're still operating as we were. The key performance indicators in the first report I presented demonstrate that productivity is as it was. So there's been no damage there. So the second part of this report is the risk register and the risk log. We reviewed the risk register and decided not to make too many changes to that because it was a high-level document that we've all worked on, as yourself as a board have been responsible for producing. So we didn't feel it was worth cluttering it up with tiny little risks. So what we've produced is a risk log, which identifies the potential risks of the pandemic and working from home. So if I just go through the risk register, the only risk we have updated is risk number 2. And that is failure to respond to changes in economic conditions. And as you can see from page 9 of the second pack, we just added a note in the controls section which says increased engagement with investment managers and monitoring of asset movement during the pandemic. Moving to the risk log on page 19. Here we set out all the potential risks of, like I said, from working from home and any other risks with regards to the operations of the fund. Again, we've detailed all of these here. We've not really needed, none of these risks have really come to light. Everything has run as smoothly as we could have hoped with little notice of working from home during a pandemic. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that the operations are continuing as they should. So happy to take any questions from anybody.
Questions, anybody?
So well done. Seems like you just moved on and got on with it, didn't you? As a thing, you know. Nice one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. There were no indications when we went through them that anyone wanted to go into private session to discuss any of the appendices. Through the minutes, unless anyone else has got anything, I think that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.